Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very, very thankful that you all could join me. We left off in our last Bible study, 1 Samuel 13. At the end, we're being told about how this huge, gigantic Philistine army is encamped at Michmash in Israel. And it's a very dire situation for Saul and his men as well as all of Israel. We're told about how the Israelites are hiding in rocks and caves and cracks and crevices. They're trying any way in the world to get away from this army. And the only weaponry in Israel that's worth fighting with is in the hands of Saul and his son Jonathan. It's very poignant because now we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel 14. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bare his armor, Come and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. So the only weaponry is Saul and Jonathan. Jonathan is going to go ahead and take the initiative and see what is this Philistine army like? And he doesn't tell Saul that he's doing this because Saul would have probably told him not to do it. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, and the people that were with him were about 600 men. They first started off with an army separated into two groups, and the army was 3,000 Israelites. 2,000 allotted to the king Saul and 1,000 to his son Jonathan. Now we're seeing in total it's only 1/5 of that size because everyone's terrified. They've ran away from this huge army that has been invading their land. 600 men out of 3,000 now remain. And Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod, and the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. It's very strange that the Bible mentions that it's Ichabod's brother, Ahitub's son. So it's the nephew of Ichabod. And as we know, Ichabod means, his name means the glory has departed, departed glory. And Saul is now with this descendant of Ichabod's, if you will. It's a very emblematic of Saul's current position. Because Saul, as we see even in this chapter, and especially in the next chapter, how he is just a very stupid king. And it doesn't take long at all for him to do this. And I would also like to clear up something from earlier in one of my previous Bible studies. Saul reigns for 40 years. King David takes the reign after him at the age of 30. But we know that Saul reigned 40 years. David took the throne at the age of 30, so it was 10 years in to Saul's reign before David was even born. So at this point, David has not even been born, and likely Jonathan is probably about 20, I would say at the most, 18, 19, 20. Very, very young man. Much like David, how he gets started out very young, fighting and such. So does Jonathan. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on the one side and a sharp rock on the other side, and the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Sinai. Right here is the land of Michmash. Okay, so the Philistines, they would have been encamped all over this land. Plus, you have to also remember that their army, this massive army that they have brought, it has split up of sorts because they've been sending raiders out to a few other places in order to loot the land. And so they're not as sizable of an army as they were whenever they first came in. Still very sizable, though. And right down here is Bozez and Sinai. This would have been where Jonathan would have been located. And Jonathan, as we see right here, he takes an initiative. He's very, very much like David. Before David wants to step up and fight Goliath. Jonathan wants to step up and fight the Philistines. And it's not just one, he's taken on well over a dozen of them by himself, just him and his armor bearer. And he has to climb this very, very steep spot right here. And once again, the Philistines would have been around over here. One of their garrisons was probably located very, very close to this area, probably right in here somewhere. And Jonathan is coming up through here with his armor bearer. The forefront of the one was situate northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go up over unto the garrison and to these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. Jonathan so reminds me of the other great men in the Bible at this point. It reminds me of Joshua and Caleb, how they were very young and willing to fight against these giants, and David after him, who would be willing to fight these giants. And we're talking about the book of Judges. That history would have already have been known unto Jonathan at this time, so he would have known about Samuel and about Shamgar. See, in the book of Judges, the second judge named a judge over Israel hundreds of years before Jonathan was a man named Shamgar. And Judges 3 tells us this about Shamgar. And after him was Shamgar the son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad. And he also delivered Israel. An ox goad is basically just a sharp stick, a pointy stick of sorts. But we see that Shamgar was also fighting the Philistines. And as most people already know about Samson, how he fought the Philistines over and over again. But Samson, not only did Shamgar kill 600 with a sharp stick, Samson killed 1,000 with a jawbone. And he found a new jawbone, speaking of Samson, jawbone of an ass, of a donkey, and put forth his hand and took it and slew 1,000 men therewith. He slew 1,000 of the Philistines. So no doubt Jonathan is looking at this situation and saying, we've been in these spots before, and there have been men stand up with faith in God, and they've took on a vast multitude of these Philistines and just the enemies of God. And we also see how this happens, not just with the Israelites, but this has happened throughout history. And whenever I started to research this, I found a plethora of times whenever just one man would stand against hundreds and would have the victory.
Aníbal Milais, 1895 to 1970, known as Soldier Millions, was the most decorated Portuguese soldier of World War I. His nickname comes from him being described as worth 1,000,000 men. During Operation Georgette, Milais stood alone with his machine gun and defeated 2 German assaults by laying down intense fire, leaving hundreds of Germans dead. He managed to cover the retreat of Portuguese and Scots despite being under heavy fire himself. He fired in all directions and stayed at his post until he ran out of ammunition. In the end, the Germans decided to go around his position, and Milais found himself behind enemy lines for 3 days. Only carrying his machine gun, he managed to rescue a Scottish major from a swamp, and the two reached Allied lines. A few months later, Soldier Millions again held back a German assault, standing alone with his Lewis gun, allowing a Belgian unit to retreat safely to a secondary trench without any casualties.
And all of this was a promise unto the people of God, be it of any nation. All this was made a promise back in Leviticus 26:8. It's recorded, and 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. So we see over and over again how God is using just a very small handful of people in order to win these battles, these enormous, impossible odds battles. And Jonathan's armor bearer said unto him, Do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee, behold, I am with thee, according to thy heart. Then said Jonathan, Behold, we will pass over unto these men, and we will discover ourselves unto them. If they say thus unto us, tarry until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place and we will not go up unto them. So, this is a very crucial point. I'm only going to spend a few seconds on it. Jonathan is asking for a sign from God, and he's not trusting in his own heart or his own courage. He's not trusting in himself. He's merely saying, if God wants us to go in unto these men and fight them, then this will happen. They'll call out to us to come to them. But if they say thus, come up unto us, then we will go up. For the Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign unto us. So once again, they're asking for a sign. Notice, all this time, you have the king of Israel who has acted in such godly manner, such a godly manner. Remember, he was prophesying a couple of years before this. He was a prophet unto the people. You know, he had joined the prophets, so he really looked like a holy man. Plus, he's sitting there under a pomegranate tree with the priest of the land, a descendant of Eli, and he's sitting there, and they're talking about what they should do, and they're worried and all this, and they're probably praying, and nothing wrong with all that. That's normal human behavior, and prayer is a good thing. We're not even told they're praying, by the way. But we see Jonathan. He gets up and he takes the initiative. He says, no. He says, God can do this. Let's get up and do it. God will, he'll use the man of action most time. The man of action. So many people just want to sit down and they just want to pray about things, and God is just waiting on someone to do something. Nothing wrong. Prayer, I believe, is the best thing in the world. But prayer and action in and of itself, and both grouped together, you cannot get a stronger combination. God loves men of action. There's a time to stand still, and then there's a time to take action. It so reminds me of whenever King David, Goliath's on out there. He's a big, huge Philistine, and he's yelling at him, and he says, and this is years later, but he yells out to him. He says, why isn't any man going to fight Goliath? You know, I don't know, man's got courage enough. He says, is there not a cause? Is there not a cause to do this? Is there not a cause to take action? I love what it says in Paul's writings. He says, redeem the times, for the days are evil, meaning make good of this time. Do good right now. Do it. But do right. Work for God. Do it right now. These days are evil. He says you could be dead at any moment and not even know it. You're constantly under bombardment. Do as much good as you possibly can right now, and redeem the time. And both of them discovered themselves, Jonathan and his young armor bearer, and both of them discovered themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer, and said, come up to us, and we will show you a thing. And Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his knees. So he's getting up. He's climbing with his, this is such a steep spot that he's coming up onto, that he has to literally climb on his hands, and it's very, very steep. And his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. And that first slaughter which Jonathan his armor bearer made was about 20 men, within, as it were, a half acre of land, which is a yoke of oxen might plow. This is very, very important, okay? We're about to see God act upon the Philistines. But first, before God ever does the really terrifying, dramatic thing to the Philistine army, which is the reason why they flee, he allows it to be heard how the Israelites are attacking them, even though it's just 2 Israelites. It's just a couple of men that they could have killed, logically speaking, just no problem whatsoever. Throw a few arrows and, but with God on their side, God says, I'm going to let it be known first that Israel is attacking them. Then I'm going to show that I am for Israel and strike the Philistines. Okay, so that way they'll fear not only God, but they'll fear Israel. And there was trembling in the host in the field, And among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. Okay, so God sends this big earthquake, huge earthquake. Oh, I mean, it would have been absolutely terrified. I remember Dave Chappelle talking about how he was in an earthquake and how he literally thought he was going to die. He said, "It feels like you're about to die. You have literally no control. Even the ground under your feet, your body is no longer in your control. Everything is in the control of God." Very terrifying moment for these Philistines. And the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. You find this quite often with evil people, how God is not the author of confusion, but Satan loves confusion. And these people were serving Satan. And so, them being his servants, immediately once that God acts upon them, they start trying to run and they start bumping into, I can only imagine it, they start bumping into one another and getting mad and hitting one another across the head, getting angry at one another and stabbing one another, killing one another. And this is the way of evil, it eats itself. Then said Saul unto the people that were with him, Number now, and see who is gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So Saul knew that his son Jonathan wasn't among them. He wanted to know who was it fighting the Philistines. And so he's probably got a little bit of an idea that his son is doing this, or at least has a part in it. And Saul said unto Ahiah, Bring hither the ark of God, for the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass, while Saul talked unto the priest, that the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said unto the priest, Withdraw thine hand. What Saul is doing right here, it's not necessarily a bad thing. He's trying to inquire of God as to whether this is the time to attack. There's obvious confusion. There's chaos among all the Philistines. This earthquake's just happened. Is this a sign from God? He's confused himself. And he tells the priest, Withdraw thine hand, right? Well, the priest had these, we believe that it was two stones like this, similar in shape, and one was white and one was dark, we believe. They were called Urim and Thummim. And what these did is they were put in a pouch under the ephod, the precious stones upon the priest's breastplate. They were put underneath that near his heart. And the king would come up and he would inquire of God through the priest, and the priest would use these two stones, or however many. They would use the Urim and Thummim to decide what God is wanting. And we believe that it was like a yes or no question, kind of like the white represents yes and the dark represents no. So the king would ask a question, the priest would pray, and then he would reach in and grab one of the stones, and if it was black, it would mean no. If it was white, it would mean yes. This is the way that we think that it went. So Saul tells the priest, Withdraw thine hand, meaning we're going to war. That's what he meant. Obviously, this is a sign. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle, and behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. I believe that this was also God's way of taking a bad situation for these Hebrew servants of the Philistines, and he took these very fear-filled servants, and he allowed the Philistines to trust them enough to bring them with them to battle against their own people. And upon all this chaos and confusion, these Hebrew servants within the midst of the Philistines rose up and fought for the Hebrews. So all of a sudden, Saul's numbers have increased drastically. We're not even told how many servants that there were, but there was probably a lot, and they had a lot more access to the Philistine weaponry, which the army of Saul didn't have. Likewise, all the men of Israel which had hid themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So his army's increasing and increasing even more. This often happens. You'll have very scared people in whom they'll not act until they see someone of courage act. And one can even liken these servants unto lost people that may wish to become Christians, but their friends are keeping them, distracted and such. Boyfriends, girlfriends, mom, dads, family, the world, atheists, whatever. They're all keeping them distracted. Satan at the very bottom of it. But they're all enslaved to this world. And then all of a sudden, whenever they see Christians, very God filled, spirit filled Christians, begin to act boldly, then they'll take courage in that. And they'll say, well, I would rather be on that side. I don't want to be on this side anymore. This side's mean, cruel, evil. I would much rather be with them. And now we're seeing these that hid themselves in the rocks and in the caves, they're coming out with courage. This is much like fellow Christians. They may fear to live for God, that they may fear to spread the word of God. They may fear for whatever reason, the millions of reasons that they come up with. They may be fearful of that. And then they see a Christian take courage and they see them stepping up to the plate and they see them taking the initiative and all of a sudden they come out and do it. And this is the way that all of us Christians have done throughout time. We encourage one another. I've been encouraged by many, many other Christians that are doing the same thing that I'm doing right now, and it brought that courage up inside of me, and that's one of the main reasons why I do what I'm doing. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Bethaven. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. I believe this was a very stupid command from him. He says, Cursed be the man that eateth any food. First of all, he's not in any position to say, Cursed be the man. That's Samuel's position. It's the man of God in whom declares stuff like that. Second of all, it's very stupid because this would have been hours and hours of fighting, hours, and the people would have become very, very weak. I mean, you have to think you're killing people. It's not as easy to kill someone. I've never done it, but it's not that easy. You're taking a sword and you're plunging it through them, or you're throwing whatever rocks. You're actually having to kill people. You're running people down and killing them. And they're fighting back. Don't think that people aren't. I've worked with livestock before, and we would have to do a whole lot of things to them that was against that they didn't want to have done, and like castrate them and stuff. And we'd have to hold them while we were doing these things, and we'd also have to put them in fences to load them up. And man, they just don't like that. And so whenever you have someone fighting back against you, that drains you tremendously. This isn't just picking up a rock and setting it over here. This isn't that kind of work. This is exhausting work that they're having to do. Also quite traumatizing, by the way. And all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. And I believe that God had sent them this honey. He said, Look, here's food for you. And when the people were coming to the wood, behold, the honey dropped. But no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath, wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. You'll often see this with godly men if they haven't hung around ungodly preachers and ungodly leaders of the church. You'll often see them, they'll be doing the very rational, sane, spiritual thing that God has put in front of them. They'll be doing it. They're involved in the work of God, and they're receiving the the rewards of God that He's given for such work, while you have all these legalists on over here, and they're trying to pin you down, and they're trying to put their own rules upon you, and and this happens even within churches, Christian churches. I also like how it says about Jonathan, and his eyes were enlightened. It's like all the rest of them were blinded by this oath that Saul had forced upon them. Very stupid king. Very, very stupid king. He does do a couple of decent things, as we're about to see, but he's a very stupid king. Then answered one of the people and said, Thy father straitly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food this day. And the people were faint. In my honest opinion, this is the worst time for a fast. This is the worst time for it. They need protein. You need food. Yeah, and this actually, as we're about to see, this actually pushes the Israelites to sin against God because they didn't want to break the king. They didn't want to sin against the king. They wind up sinning against God. So if you're given an ungodly law placed upon you, it's all right to rebel against that. If God tells you one thing and the government says another, rebel against the government. Be an outlaw. That's fine. But do God's work. Then said Jonathan, My father had troubled the land. Listen to the wisdom of this young man. Then said Jonathan, My father hath troubled the land. See, I pray you, how mine eyes have been enlightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. He says, My father hath troubled the land. No telling. It seems like Saul is just a bad king from the get-go. It's not like God gave them a few years of good and then the rest were bad. It's almost like all of them were bad. How much more if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For had there not been now a much greater slaughter among the Philistines, he says, Look, we would already have killed more of our enemies if we had just had nourishment. And they smote the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, and the people were very faint. Now right up here you'd see Michmash, and they were fighting them all around this area right here, but they drove them a little bit over this way, then they drove them all the way back into their own land. See, whenever they ran to the east, they would make their way around here. They took the long route, if you will. So the Philistines are very, very exhausted by this day, and many of them dead. But probably not as many. Are dead as could have been. And the people flew upon the spoil, and took sheep and oxen and calves, and slew them on the ground. And the people did eat them with the blood. They ate them raw. They were so. Have you ever been so hungry that you eat raw meat? You don't even care how it tastes. You literally feels like you're gonna die, because you have probably ran out 10 pounds of your own fat by the time that you reach them. They sin against God. God tells them, always drain the blood from your meat and then cook it. And they didn't even care about that. They were on the verge of death. And this is the Israelites we're talking about. Okay, so they're sinning against the Lord. Then they told Saul, saying, Behold, the people sin against the Lord, and that they eat with the blood. And he said, Ye have transgressed. Roll a great stone unto me this day. So now, because of his very dumb oath, what a stupid man. This angers me so much reading this. You can just see the arrogancy in this moron of a king. And I couldn't imagine having a king like this ruling over me. This is like the worst of bosses. He doesn't take any personal responsibility. He's so self-absorbed. But ye have transgressed. Why did they transgress? Because you told them not to eat. And Saul said, Disperse yourselves among the people, and say unto them, Bring me hither every man his ox, and every man his sheep, and slay them here, and eat, and sin not against the Lord in eating with the blood. And all the people brought every man his ox with him that night, and slew them there. Basically, he tells them, well, bring a big stone like an altar, and bring your meat here and cook it here. We'll make sacrifices here, and you can eat here, and don't eat it with the blood. So this is a good move by Saul. He's saying, make sure that you don't eat with the blood. He doesn't punish them for sinning. Like I said, he's not 100% bad yet. And Saul built an altar unto the Lord. The same was the first altar that he built unto the Lord. And Saul said, Let us go down after the Philistines by night, and spoil them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them. And they said, Do whatsoever seemeth good unto thee. Then said the priest, Let us draw near hither unto God. And Saul asked counsel of God, Shall I go down after the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into the hand of Israel? But he answered him not that day. The way that Saul would have done this is through probably the Urim and Thummim. He would have asked the priest, should we attack them? And the priest would have dug into the pouch, and he would have pulled out probably the black stone, and had kept getting a no, that he's not going to answer them. And Saul said, Draw ye near hither all the chief of the people, and know and see wherein this sin hath been this day. So he's being told about who began this sin, who's the one that initiated this eating during my oath being given. This is the reason why Jesus says, Swear no oath. Don't make an oath. Read Jephthah's vow if you ever wish to see why. A very good reason not to make an oath. For as the Lord liveth which saveth Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But there was not a man among all the people that answered him. See, the people knew that it was Jonathan that had initiated eating, and he did so ignorantly. He hadn't been there whenever his father made the oath. The people did tell him that were near him about the oath, but Jonathan, he wasn't worried about the ramifications from his dad. He was much more just, hey, look, I'm starving. I've been fighting. He was thinking logically. He was thinking with reason. And his father is a very irrational man, not as involved in the fighting as he was, and not as close to God as he was either. Then said he unto all Israel, Be ye on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said unto Saul, Do what seemeth good unto thee. What they're doing is they're casting lots to see, because no one's telling Saul who was the first man to eat. And so he says, Well, me and the prince, me and my son Jonathan, we will be on this side, and all the rest of you get on that side. So that way he could say that him and his son were innocent. Therefore Saul said unto the Lord God of Israel, Give a perfect lot. And Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. Meaning that probably through, once again, the Urim and Thummim, they had a lot be taken through these stones. And the Lord told them automatically that it was in the camp of Saul and Jonathan. Probably shocked Saul, by the way. And Saul said, Cast lots between me and Jonathan my son, and Jonathan was taken. So then he breaks it down between him and his son. Jonathan is the one that's chosen. Then Saul said to Jonathan, Tell me what thou hast done. And Jonathan told him and said, I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in mine hand, and lo, I must die. I believe that it's kind of got this meaning like, and lo, I must die. It's kind of got this. He's like, yes, I'm guilty of this, but I mean, now I'm going to die over that, because look at how little of a matter that he makes of it. I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod. He says, with the little honey, the end of the rod. He says, very, very small portion that I take, and now I'm going to die over this. He said, almost like pointing the finger back at his dad and saying, Look at how stupid of an oath you made. Now I'm going to die over a little bit of honey from the end of a rod. And Saul answered, God do so, and more also, for thou shalt surely die, Jonathan. Now this is the same man, Saul, in whom in the next chapter, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, he spares this evil king. Yet right here we see how irrational that I keep coming back to rationality, because he's not in his right mind. It seems he can't read the room very well, but he's wanting to kill his son right here, a godly man. And this shows how far away from God Saul truly is. This shows how evil that he really is at heart. It doesn't matter what his status is among the people. And the people said unto Saul, Shall Jonathan die, who hath wrought this great salvation in Israel? God forbid. As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he hath wrought with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, that he died not. The people's like, What's wrong with you, king? Don't kill him. He's the only one who did anything. And we see that Saul treats David in the exact same manner. David does all good things for Israel, for God, for his people, for Saul even. He does all good things, and Saul hates him for it. This man, I believe, is just, he's either possessed or a moron, and probably both. Then Saul went up from following the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. So Saul took the kingdom over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, and against the children of Ammon, and against Edom, and against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. And whithersoever he turned himself, he vexed them. And he gathered a host, and smote the Amalekites, and delivered Israel out of the hands of them that spoiled them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, and Ishua, and Malchishua. And the names of his two daughters were these: the name of the firstborn Merab, and the name of the younger Michal. We'll see later on how Michal marries David. It's his first wife. And the name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, and the daughter of Ahimaaz. And the name of the captain of his host was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. And Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. And there was sore war against the Philistines all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any strong man or any valiant man, he took him unto him. So we'll see how he is militarily. He's a very good tactician. He's military. He's very savvy in the military mindset. Now, one last comment is how Saul, he was apparently on a very good track. And then he starts to disobey, and through fear. It seems like through fear he's disobeying. You know, he makes the sacrifice unto God before Samuel gets there because he sees that his army's going away and the huge army of the Philistines is coming. So it's out of fear that he disobeys God. We should know that we should put our fear aside, much like Jonathan, his son, put fear to the side, and he went up against an entire army by himself. This is the true man of God. But that is for today's lesson. Lord willing, tomorrow we'll be getting into 1 Samuel 15. Lord of peace be with you. Amen.